All right, so you know how it is. You sit through history class, right? You get the dates, you learn the names, but it's like they only give you the official story.
Yeah,
What about like the rest of it? The real stuff, the stuff that shaped what happened, the stuff they just kind of leave out.
right.
That's the stuff I find really fascinating.
It's definitely in those little details, in those individual stories,
Hmm.
that you get a much more well-rounded understanding of what went down.
Yeah.
When you apply that to something like the Vietnam War, you get a very different picture from what a lot of us learned in school.
Totally. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're going deep on this one. It's the Vietnam War, the untold stories they don't teach in school. It's like, forget the textbook for a minute.
Yeah.
Close your eyes. Imagine you're like 19 years old. You're dropped into this crazy green jungle. It's hot as hell, humid, loud. You hear choppers, gunfire way off in the distance, rain that never stops, and that constant radio static. It's like every muscle in your body is tense. You're covered in mud, and you can't even remember what sleep feels like. Then, boom, the ground just explodes under you. Landmine. You're freaking out. Your heart's pounding. You're gripping your rifle like crazy. And the worst part is, you don't even know who just tried to kill you.
It's terrifying.
This isn't some movie, you know?
Yeah.
This was real life for so many young people.
Yeah.
Those are the stories we're getting to try and understand today.
What really gets me about that scene you just painted is how personal it makes the whole thing. We get away from abstract numbers and politics, and it's like we're right there with them, feeling what they felt.
Exactly.
It makes us face that huge human cost,
Yeah.
the psychological impact, in a way that a timeline of battles just can't.
Totally. And when you think about how this whole thing supposedly started, it's crazy. Okay, so rewind a bit. Gulf of Tonkin incident, August 2nd, 1964, that ring a bell. What we were all told was that North Vietnamese patrol boats just attacked an American destroyer, the USS Maddox, for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
This became the reason for sending in tons more troops, for escalating the war, really. You'd hear about it on the news all the time. The president would talk about it. It's
Yeah.
like, this is it. This is why we have to go to war.
It was presented as a clear act of aggression that demanded a response.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really wild. Decades later, when all these classified documents finally came out, a totally different story started coming together. It turns out that attack, well, at least how they described it to everyone, it might not have even happened.
Wow.
Think about that. This huge war, a war that defined an entire generation, might have been based on something that wasn't even true.
What's so important about that is it makes you question the whole reason for the war.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how information, or maybe misinformation, shapes what people think and what the government does, especially during a war.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just like a little mistake. It had huge consequences.
It really did, because if the whole thing that started the war was maybe made up, then it changes how you see everything that came after it.
Right.
The draft, which ripped families apart, the 58,000 American lives lost, the suffering of the Vietnamese people, it's unimaginable.
Yeah.
All of it goes back to this one event that might have been based on nothing. It's really disturbing.
It really sets the stage for understanding a whole other crucial part of this war. The way they fought it and where they fought it.
Right.
This wasn't some regular war with lines on a map and guys in uniforms on different sides, like World War II.
Nowhere near it. Imagine yourself in that jungle. Forget about those newsreels. It's unbelievably hot. You can barely breathe. You hear bugs buzzing all around you, maybe a Vietnamese radio somewhere, your boots sinking in the mud with every step. It was a totally different experience.
Yeah.
Unlike WWII, where you knew who the enemy was, in Vietnam, you couldn't tell who was who. The Viet Cong were like ghosts, blending right into the villages and then attacking at night.
It makes you think of every single person you meet as a possible threat.
Exactly.
And it challenges everything you think you know about war. There's no clear battlefield and safe zone.
Right. And their tactics were unlike anything American soldiers had ever seen. Forget those big battles. This was a war fought with tricks and traps. Think about booby traps. Simple, but they could really mess you up. Punji stakes, they're these sharpened bamboo spears, sometimes dipped in poison, hidden in holes in the ground.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine falling onto one of those things?
No way.
Or think about walking through the jungle and suddenly you trip a wire and boom, a grenade goes off. And then there were the tunnels. Huge underground networks that went under entire villages.
Really?
They had entire units down there, supplies, even hospitals. It was like fighting an enemy that could disappear into thin air.
It's amazing how they used the jungle and their knowledge of the land to their advantage.
Yeah.
They took what would have been weaknesses and turned them against the American military, who had all the technology.
It was constant stress, you know. You never knew where the danger was coming from. You couldn't trust the land. You couldn't always trust the people around you. It was a war that got inside your head just as much as it was fought on the battlefield.
It messed with you.
Yeah, and the conditions were just brutal. Imagine that jungle. You're struggling to breathe. Someone's screaming in the distance. You hear a medevac chopper coming in. You're constantly sweating. It's over 100 degrees. There are mosquitoes everywhere that can give you malaria. And you know there are snipers hiding in the trees. It was like the environment itself was trying to kill you.
It's like you said, on top of the fighting and the conditions, you also had morale getting lower and lower the longer the war went on.
Right.
No clear goals, no end in sight. Seeing people die all the time.
Yeah.
It was all just weighing down on those soldiers.
And then you had something that really changed how people saw the war. The media coverage. For the first time, they had TV cameras right there in Vietnam showing everyone back home what was really happening. People weren't just reading about it in the newspaper anymore. They were seeing it for themselves.
Right.
It's a whole new level of reality.
It totally changed things. You couldn't hide from the truth anymore. Everyone saw how brutal it really was.
Exactly. People saw body bags piled up, children burned by napalm, villages destroyed. And then there was the My Lai Massacre. It was a turning point. The reports were horrific. They said American soldiers had killed hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians, men, women, and children. It was a huge shock to everyone back home, and it made people really question the war.
It showed the dark side of war, how things can go so wrong.
Yeah, and when those soldiers finally made it back home, things weren't any easier.
Right.
They didn't get the welcome home they deserved, not like soldiers from other wars.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of parades and people thanking them, they got ignored, yelled at, even blamed for a war they didn't even start.
It's heartbreaking.
They came back to a country that was totally divided, and a lot of them felt alone, like no one understood what they went through. They carried the weight of that experience for the rest of their lives.
It's a shame that they were treated that way after everything they'd been through.
It really is. So let's talk about some of the stuff that wasn't as obvious, the stuff that went on behind the scenes. We tend to think about the fighting on the ground, but there was a whole other side to the war that a lot of people don't even know about. Imagine the noise, fighter jets flying over, radios crackling with coded messages, bombs exploding in the distance. The air war in Vietnam was huge. The U.S. dropped more bombs on Vietnam than they did in all of World War II.
Wow, that's hard to even imagine.
And then there's Agent Orange, which they used to clear out the jungle so the Viet Cong couldn't hide. But it caused so many problems for so many people, both Americans and Vietnamese, cancers, birth defects, all kinds of health issues. It was a chemical weapon that's still affecting people today.
It's one of those things that makes you think about the ethics of war, you know?
Yeah.
The choices we make and the long-term consequences.
And then you have what they called the secret war in Laos and Cambodia. These were covert operations, stuff that the American public didn't even know about. The CIA was involved, special forces were going on secret missions, there were bombing campaigns that were never even admitted to. It was all very hush-hush, dangerous, and experimental.
It really makes you wonder about what else we don't know, you know? How much is kept hidden from us, even now.
So after years of fighting, after so many lives lost, after all the political turmoil, what happened in the end? Everything went quiet. You just hear the wind blowing and a helicopter flying away in the distance.
Yeah.
April 30th, 1975, Saigon falls. It was chaotic. People were desperate to escape. Helicopters were taking off from the roof of the embassy. The U.S. pulled out. North Vietnam took over. Over 2 million Vietnamese civilians died. And it just leaves you with this question. What was it all for?
It's the question that everyone asks about the Vietnam War, you know?
Yeah.
When you see how much everyone suffered, you have to wonder why it even happened.
And for America, it changed everything. It cost so much money, $168 billion back then, which is a lot more today. It made people lose trust in the government, and it divided the country in a way that took a long time to heal. So when you look back at it all, at the lies, the fighting, the secret wars, the aftermath, you really have to ask yourself, did anyone really win?
It's a question without an easy answer. It really captures how complicated and how tragic the whole thing was.
Right.
It makes us look at the reality of war, at the cost of getting involved in other countries' conflicts.
The Vietnam War was more than just dates and battles in a textbook. It was a human story, full of tragedy and courage and untold experiences that we're still trying to understand today. What do you think? Looking back at it all, was it worth it? Should America have been involved in the Vietnam War? Tell us what you think. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're interested in more of these deep dives into history, make sure you subscribe to the channel.